so rise and shine. Most of you know that phrase, right? Jiaming? Okay if I use your musical instrument now? Okay. Anyway, rise and shine. That's what parents, when they go up to their kids' bedroom in the morning and try to get them up for school, right? And a lot of time they rise, but they don't shine. They're kind of grumpy. I find that out from my nearly 4-year-old granddaughter. We show up to pick her up for preschool, and recently she hasn't been very shiny, but we're trying to find ways to make her shine. Well, this is kind of the title in this message, How to Rise Up and Shine. And some of you will recognize the phrase rise up comes from Nehemiah 2:18. What had happened was after Nehemiah arrives in Judea and Jerusalem as their new governor, he spends some time reconnoitering the city, the walls, and he takes a first-hand look at all the problems that's been facing down the Jews for generations. And their discouragement is palpable, but he is going to tell them what he believes God wants them to do. And so he says, you know what, you're in trouble, you're in shame, this is what's been driving you and capturing you and kept you in bondage. We want to bring you out of it. Let us build. And he does it in a very low-key manner, but the people, like I said last week, they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so they said, yes, let us rise up and build. And then it says, so they strengthened their hands for the good work. And so they were going to now begin the turnaround of their lives as individuals and as a people. And that's not easy, because if you have been long-term in a condition, whether it's long-term illiteracy, long-term poverty, long-term anything, it's the norm. It's your normal. And so to try to change it really, really, really is hard, even to understand why you should do it. Now, in a certain way, we too are facing the same kind of thing as Christians, because we live in a world that is becoming more and more hostile to Christianity and to especially the Bible and what God says. And, we can be beaten down in our workplaces. We can be beaten down by our neighbors and our friends and our relatives and family that don't believe. We face the challenge of reaching out to them, and we need the uplift. We need to find how we can become encouraged. And so what's going to happen is in Nehemiah chapter 3, we're going to learn how they were able to bring about turning the corner and beginning a whole new chapter about their national history. We face this not only as individuals, we face these challenges as a church. Take us, for example, the English congregation. We need to build it up in numbers and in coming into greater and greater discipleship. Now, let me ask you a question. Numbers and discipleship, which is more important? Discipleship, right? Jesus wants quality over quantities. And you saw that as he operated. He would leave the crowds behind, and he would work intensely with people, because he knew that at the end of his life, he would say, go and make disciples. And if he didn't spend time working with them intensely, showing them how to be disciples, how were they going to know how to do it? And so he spent the time with them, working with them, so that they would be able to continue this on, and he would leave it. And the same thing for us. We need to grow as disciples, be people, as Perry was pointing out from this passage that he selected, people who are doers of the word, okay? And so that's something we need to do. Another thing we need to do in our English congregation is we need to strengthen all of our ministries. We're small, But we can't afford to skip out on ministries. You know, we need to have fellowship. We need to have worship. We need to have training. We need to have outreach. And we can't say we don't have enough and we can skip it, because we'll be like a car. We need all four wheels. You want to drive with one flat tire? Ruin the tire, right? And eventually the other tires will go. Your wheel will go. All kinds of problems will take place. And so we have to do that, and we need to know how to divide it up. And so that's one of the things we've been working on, is to try to get all these ministries filled, and we're trying to get it defined so that people know what they're supposed to be doing, and we can be working together. And then, as I said, a third thing we're facing as a church is whether we're going to be building in that corner of where we have grass, okay? And study after study has shown that when you reach a certain size and it gets cramped, people stop inviting. People stop coming because it's uncomfortable for them. Kind of like rapid transit in Southern California. You want a lot more buses, you want a lot more trains, otherwise you're going to stop riding. Well, the same thing happens in churches. And so we're needing to do that for our future generations. But this doesn't only apply to our church life. It applies to our personal life. One of our members is the president of the Homeowners Association. All right? And I've known Homeowner Association presidents in the past. It's a thankless job. Most of the homeowners would rather see their property value go down and then blame the president and his board than to take responsibility. So he's struggling to try the challenge of bringing a group of people, neighbors even, together to keep up their property values. You notice the news about all the thefts? You buy something from Amazon, and they come and deliver it, and there's another guy following the Amazon truck or the FedEx truck or the UPS truck. And right after the doorbell is rung and before you can come to the door, what do? They get out of the car and they help themselves to your package, okay? And I've seen some of the security footage in my neighborhood. And the guy drives up, and the driver, he conveniently at that point puts his hand and whole body down as if he's retrieving something from the carpet. The other guy leaves the passenger seat, and he's got his big hoodie on, so you can't tell anything about his face, and they just come right up, and your package is gone. I've got a neighbor who's had 2 deliveries of the same item taken from him before he can get to it, and they're retirees. Okay, so you might be in a position where you have to organize a neighborhood watch. And you know what? You got to get everybody to cooperate for this venture that helps the community. Or some of you may be planning a family trip, a family vacation trip. Well, it's no fun for the planner and the one who's got to drive it. If you get everybody working together, from the youngest to the oldest, then you've got a pleasant trip. Otherwise, the whole trip is complaints from the back seat, complaints from the person next to you, and you never want to plan a trip like that again. And so the idea is we face these challenges as a church, we face these challenges in our personal lives, and we need to know how to tackle them, how to feel positive, and how to develop the energy so that we can be productive. And so we're going to learn from this passage about how we can rise and shine. We're going to start with 2:18, and then, like I said, we're going to cover the rest of chapter 3. In the New Testament, in Romans 15:4, it says that these stories from the Old Testament and in the Bible are stories given to teach us and to give us hope. 1 Corinthians 10:11 says that these stories are for our examples. And so I want you to take it in that way. These things are not absolute truth, all right? They don't talk about God. They don't talk about Trinity. They don't talk about these great core doctrines, but they show us how to live. And they say tell us that God is concerned that we live life well, we live life effectively. And so that's the way we're going to go through it. And like I said, we're going to kind of go through it like an archaeologist. Archaeologist goes into the rubble, right? Into all this mess. And they dig, and they see something they recognize, they pull it out, and they get the brush and they brush it off, and lo and behold, they have found a treasure. And it's worth all of that effort. And so we're going to look at 4 of the treasures that we're going to be using for our own lives, okay? And so we're going to talk about these 4. How we will rise up when we respond to God's spiritual challenges. So we're talking about how we will rise up. The second thing is that we will rise up when we allow God to stretch us. The third thing is we will rise up when we face these struggles with zeal. Fourth thing is we will rise up when we can connect with each other, when we can link arm in arm to do these big challenges in our lives. Okay, so those are the 4 that we should be looking for. Turn with me now then to Nehemiah chapter 2, and we're going to look at the second half of verse 18. After Nehemiah finishes telling them about where he thinks God is leading, here's what they say. And they said, let us rise up and build. And so they strengthened their hand for the good work. And practically every word there is important, and so we're going to look at them in particular. But it shows how they responded to this challenge. And one of the things that you're going to see is that they took it as something that came from God, that it was God's call. So after this point, in fact, in all of chapter 3, Nehemiah's name doesn't even come up. It just talks about the people. So in a sense, God is the boss, and Nehemiah is just a manager who is there facilitating all of this. And so they take a very personal ownership of the challenge that is before him. God is boss, and they call it the good work, and they say, we are his servants. So that is ownership. And so they would do that, and then they would strengthen their hands for the work. You know, when you are leading a project and you give a task to someone, you want them, when they are given that, to take initiative. You don't want them coming back and constantly asking you questions as if, passive resistance, just kind of bug you to death, spend more time with you than with the work they're trying to do. You want them to just go and take off with it and do their very best and do things that you did not even think about when you were doing the general planning. And so the Jews said, this is a good work. Now, just that doesn't sound important. But up to this point, their concept of this work was entirely different. The perspective was entirely different. Before this, they said, it's too big. It's too hard. It's too dirty. It's too time-consuming. It's not my job. Are we there yet? Right? You've experienced that? When people come to you with that kind of an attitude? It's daunting and discouraging. But instead, now they saw it as a good work. Turn with me to Ephesians 2:10 and what God says about good work. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Oh, all right, you're up there already. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for what? Good works, which God has prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And this is not just talking to certain people. This is talking about all of us. That God has molded us, and he has prepared us, and he has things that he wants us to to participate in and to do. And so, the problem is not that they didn't have a good work. The problem was that the Jews had lost track of their good work, its sense of compellingness, its sense of urgency, its sense of claim on their lives. And that happens. I know husbands who have forgotten that their job is to what? Be a great husband. I've known wives who have forgotten that it was their job to be great wives. We can't lose track. And so these people had lost track. And, it's the same way for the church. What is the big task of the church? We talked about it earlier. To go and make disciples. To always be going. That's the first gerund that is in that passage. We are always to be out there being witnesses for God. And by being witnesses for God, we prepare people for the gospel. We usually make it harder than we should. One of our middle school boys was talking to me 2 weeks ago. A week ago. He was telling me about how he kept trying to argue with his father to get him to be a Christian. A middle schooler arguing with his father. And I said, that's not going to work. You're not going to win. I said, instead, let God change you. Let God make you the very best possible middle schooler. And then when he sees your life, you will be a witness. And that will prepare him for that day. Mr. Tien and Grace and I were very much on track with the same thing. Because when I wrote a card to their parents, I quoted 1 Peter chapter 3. And Grace in her testimony quoted 1 Peter chapter 3. That, it isn't by our words, but it's by our lives. In the quietness of our lives that are lived out, that nobody's going to argue against if it's a good life, we become witnesses. And through their grandmother, through their parents, and how they took care of their dad, lay the groundwork for that moment where God wants to intervene and do a good work. And so this is the way we should be behaving. But then 1 Peter chapter 3, further on down says, and then be ready to say something. So our job is to be witnesses, to make disciples. And the first step is our lives should always be the kind of lives that's going to attract people to Jesus, right? But the second thing is we need to be able to say why we love Jesus. Can you, if I just came up to you and said, hey, can you give me a 30-second explanation of why you love Jesus? You should be able to do that. Okay? You should be able to have a short version and a longer version that you can expand on. What I recommend to you today, this week, is to come out with a simple one-point outline. You ever see a one-point outline? That's how simple this is. Of being able to say to people why God matters, why He's important, why you love Him and believe in Him. And then expand on that so that you have something to be able to say to people. When you meet somebody on the train in China, you want to be able to say, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian from America. And they say, what's a Christian? And you say, I'll tell you why I'm a Christian. Real simple. Okay? And so that's our primary thing. And we have lost the compellingness of that in our lives. And we need, as a congregation, as individual Christians, to reclaim that. When was the last time we shared the gospel? When was the last time people came us to say, you're a blessing to me? The way you talk, the way you treat others. It's a real high calling, okay? Every bit as high a calling as what they're doing here. Okay, second thing to go on to is we rise up and we trust God as He stretches us out of our comfort zones. The more God stretches us, the taller we rise. Remember some of you, when you go into your teen years and your body was growing so fast that it hurt? The joints hurt? You know, that kind of breakthrough growth is uncomfortable, maybe even a bit painful. And that reflects back to what happens to us spiritually. If we're experiencing that, that's okay. When you come to Nehemiah chapter 3, the first group that you see talked about building a wall is the high priest. Now here's a guy, whose fingers are soft. Doesn't do heavy lifting. How heavy is a scroll? That's all he's done. And yet you see in this passage how they got into it. And not just them, but other people. In 3:1 and 2, we talk about the high priest and the priest. In verse 8, we talk about the goldsmith and the people who make perfume. Verse 12, we talk about the civic officials and his daughter. In 14 and other places, we talk about people who come from out of town. And at the end of the chapter, we talk about the merchants. People who were stepping outside of their comfort zone, doing things that they hadn't done before, but they didn't say, I can't do it. They said, let's pitch in and let's do our very best. And so God paid attention to these people who said yes. He paid attention to others who said no. But it was all valuable, and everybody needed to do their part. Because if you had any group that was not doing their part, the wall wouldn't have gone up. And the beauty of having everybody doing their part was the whole wall went up simultaneously. And so it got built with no gaps from which the enemy could come and attack and penetrate. So that was the beauty of it, because everybody was pitching in. And so before they could mount an effective attack, it was built. But it called for a lot of people stepping out of their comfort zone. Let me share a real quick story. Last Sunday, I met with a bunch of kids from my college days. Because when I was in college, I was in this little immigrant church of Cantonese kids. And I had the only car. I was one of 3 collegiates. So I was running around picking up all these kids for church. And I've had all these squealing Hong Kong kids in the back seat, yakking away in a language I couldn't understand. And when I met them, I met their children and spouses. And I could complain how these kids vexed me in the back seat. But those were happy memories. One of them said, oh yeah, he's the guy who told me how to check my oil when I got my car. I said, really? And such a joy to think of the little things that you've done together in their lives. And as Pat and I drove home from this 45th anniversary of a church that we helped to plant, we said, our lives are rich with these kind of memories of people we would not have met, of people that we have not only shared with, but also learned from. We can live these very passive lives, but if you will get involved and try new things, you just stretch yourself and you will become both deeper and wider, and it's such a pleasure. The third thing that helped them along to get this job done is they rose up and they used zeal. In chapter 3, you see groups of people who took not only their one section of wall, but they went to a second section and they went to a third section. Okay? You got townspeople, when their town nobles would not participate, verse 5, they would participate regardless, and they would work extra to make up for their nobles who wouldn't do the work. One person said he had such an enthusiasm. They're described as people who put their shoulder to the work. They had a mind to work, and that's why it got half built, it says in chapter 4. And so there is that zeal. And ours isn't based on emotion. When we are enthusiastic, you can see some of you over there, it's based on what? It's based on faith. That when God calls us to something, He's going to help us to accomplish it. And so we need to proceed based on faith, and we will have the zeal. And I'm not just talking about optimism. I'm talking about the same kind of zeal that penetrates all of us and has us thinking, how can I do a better job of this? When I mopped the floor at this church, I learned something. I learned that when I mop the floors in the bathroom, I got to do a whole different way. You know why? People are coming into the bathroom while I'm mopping. So instead of using a lot of water, I use less water and I use more muscle. Practically do a dry mop, because when their dirty shoes come in, what happens when they're done? Looks like I didn't mop. It looks messier than before. I also learned you don't use a whole lot of solvent, because that solvent stays on the floor and makes the floor sticky all week. You see, and this is what I'm talking about, that when you are doing it, you are engaged. And the fourth thing that we need to do to rise up is to link arms and to participate together, and not just to do it on our own. You heard this American expression, many hands make for light work. That's right. And so, one person doing it is going to be very hard. But if we're all doing it, and if we're all doing our section, we just spent a prayer retreat where we talked about teamwork. It's very important for us to work together as a team. For this, I challenge each one of us. If you're wanting to get into a service area, find a team that you can serve together with, to link up and to be encouraged. Well, God has another chapter here with all these names. Why? Because God pays specific attention. He knows who are the workers. He knows who are the shirkers. And he says in Hebrews 11, this shocking verse, it says in Hebrews 6:10, for God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. God would not be so unrighteous as to forget. I tell you, one of the things I appreciate is the opportunity to jump right in. Sometimes when I come to a new church, I'll volunteer within the first week. And I've never had anybody say no to me. I think we have the same spirit. And so we look forward to being able to rise up and to shine.